Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm your host Henry Grossek, and my guest is Dr Adam Fraser, peak performance researcher, author and international presenter. In no particular order, Adam: gym junkie, family man, geek researcher and lover of heavy metal music. That's quite an eclectic array of interests. Can you explain?
Well, I've always had a quite a broad eclectic variation. I suppose I'm a really curious guy. But yeah, there's some of the aspects of my life. I mean, family is obviously number one, but gym junkie is kind of the thing that allows me to keep pace with this very frantic lifestyle that I lead, and also just makes me a better version of myself. But heavy metal has always been a really key theme in my life, and it's something that I listen to every day, and yeah, it just makes me who I am.
Your interest in heavy metal music, where did that begin?
I don't know, it was just as a teenager, just an absolute love of it, and used to go to all the concerts. You know, Iron Maiden are my absolute favourite band, and you know, even when I was editing my book the other day, I was playing Metallica and someone came in and said, "How the hell do you focus while you're listening to that noise?" But yeah, it's something I really love, and something that's never left me.
And what was your answer?
I find it calming for some reason. I don't know what it is, whether I've just been listening to that style of music for so many years, but much to the dismay of my office, I still listen to it today.
Now, an area that causes you some consternation and concern as distinct from making you feel better, Adam, is your observation that the business and personal development world and education today, there's so much fallacy and fads around, and just misinformation on the work we do.
Yeah, and this comes from my academic background of, you know, being a researcher and having that academic. And this is a conversation we actually had earlier this morning, is that education, particularly corporate education, has been broken down into a marketing activity, and you know, how do we condense everything to sound bites? So one of my concerns is that the corporate training that's happening is far too shallow, and is often based on stuff that hasn't even been proven to work. Like, even if you think of affirmation and the impact of affirmation, which has kind of been the cornerstone technique of the self-help world forever. And the theory is, say something to yourself positive over and over again, and it'll either magically come true or you'll believe it. When, you know, it was until 2007, no researcher looked at, does affirmation actually work? And a woman from Waterloo University called Joanna Wood did a groundbreaking study that said not only did affirmation not work, it made the situation worse. So my concern is that too much of the stuff that we do in sort of adult education is based on it's good marketing and it's snappy or it's popular, rather than actually does it work and is there some sort of basis to it.
Now, you've done a PhD yourself, so I presume to some degree that's led you into the world of rigorous research.
It's funny. When I finished my PhD, it was such a scarring experience. I said to myself, I will never do research ever again. And, you know, I had a PhD where, you know, my supervisor left halfway through, and I was kind of hung out there and I was begging other people for help. So it was a terrible experience. And then I went into the corporate speaking world, where I presented some of my research and some of my ideas, and did that very successfully. But what I noticed was there was a gap. Like, you were either an awesome researcher, but you couldn't communicate it, like you just couldn't make it palatable to people, or you were really suave in marketing, but you were thin deep. And what I started to think about is a differentiator in the marketplace is, could you be a researcher that can translate it into, you know, palatable information that the masses can take on. And that's our big differentiator in the marketplace, is we do the research. So a lot of presenters might read a book and then get up and regurgitate that. But what we present is our own research and our own data. And that's our kind of differentiator in the marketplace. So yeah, I've kind of come full circle and gone back into being the academic. Yeah.
So a lot of your research around the business and personal development, peak performance work, the term collateral damage comes up a lot in your work. Just reading through that, it would seem to me like too many of us are working harder, not smarter.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I kind of have an obsession with performance. Like it just really interests me. How do we do what we do, but do it better? And we were talking earlier, you said, I've always had really great mentors. I've done the same. Like I literally attach myself to people. I think I stalk them into being my mentor. They give up and just go with it. But I've had really smart, wise people over the years give me good guidance. And what I noticed in my performance research is that while people achieved performance, there was often this trail of destruction. Like we talked about elite athletes before, most of them are disasters. Like their whole life is so insular and so selfish that, you know, their relationships, other aspects of their life really aren't in a good, safe, sort of healthy place. And what I would see is really senior business people would achieve the CEO position, but the collateral damage on their mental health, physical health, relationships, destructive relationships with their family was, and most of them got to the end and went, far out, if I had my time over again, I wouldn't have gone down that path, or I would have backed off a bit and invested more in my personal life. So just from the sadness of seeing that, where our research has gone is how do we achieve high performance but without that collateral damage that normally comes with it, that's all too familiar.
It's something which is very present in my profession, and I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of research. Professor Phil Riley in particular has shown that the well-being of school principals is declining and at very toxic points. We have this almost martyrdom philosophy in our profession. Yeah,
and you guys aren't alone. But I mean, obviously over the last 4 years we've been doing this project called the Flourish Movement, which is being, you know, Phil Riley's research is great, that's showing there's a problem, but the next step is, well, what's the solution? And what the Flourish Movement has been looking at is, well, how do we solve those problems? And one of the challenges principals face is that they are so connected to the job and they see it as such a meaningful, like it's beyond a vocation, that they lose themselves in the role. And the fallout is on their well-being and their personal lives. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Too many principals are seeing that collateral damage of being so dedicated to the job.
And it's interesting that over time, Adam, we haven't addressed this issue earlier. I mean, with all due respect to you, it's not something new that's only just happened since Adam Fraser came along.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't really have an answer to that question. I don't know whether it's kind of like the boiling frog, where it's crept up and crept up and crept up. And maybe, I don't know, part of it might be that it's hard for you to come up with your own solution because, like, one of the things we've shown about this job is it's so busy. Like, a school principal is the broadest job we have ever seen. There are more aspects and more components to this role. It is so broad, and most of you guys are just trying to keep your head above water, let alone think about transformation or the solutions to this problem.
Now, one of the areas that you've come up with as a way of attempting to deal with collateral damage, it's a very interesting place. It's called the third space because A lot of my colleagues, and I assume people in the food chain of leadership in organisations, and you would have heard this, Adam, they say, well, look, I take your point, but the work's got to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so much we can do to look at stopping that collateral damage. There are so many, we often have that sort of victim mentality of, well, that's just the way it is and that's just the job. But there's so much proactive action we can take to address the impact of the role on us. And you mentioned, this is a piece of research we did a number of years ago called The Third Space, which put simply looks at the transitional gaps between what we do. So the first space is what we're doing now, second space is what we're about to do, the third space is that gap in between, like how do we move from one? And that could be one meeting to another. For a principal, it might be going from a meeting with a parent where they're very aggressive or frustrated, and then they have to meet with one of their staff and be empathetic and coaching and understanding. Or it could also be going from work to home. What it looks at is how do we use these transitional gaps in our day to get over what we've just done, but most importantly, get our head right for the thing we're about to go into. And too often we kind of carry the mood or mindset of that thing into that thing. And it affects our performance and our impact and also our well-being. So yeah, I mean, to this day, that's probably the most popular concept I've ever come up with. Yeah.
It's got an interesting history too, the story behind the third space.
Yeah, well, it's been influenced by a lot of things over the years. So, yeah, it was something that I kept seeing time and time again. And one of the first is I was doing some work with the military and talking to some of the soldiers. I said, what's the hardest thing about being a soldier? And I would think it would be, not die. But they said, coming home's the hardest thing. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we're away for 6 months. We're in this totally unique environment. And then they drop us home and we're supposed to fit back in. And, the family dynamic has changed. Society is very different. They said that transition home is really, really hard. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And then some of them talked about things they did to prepare themselves to come home. Then on top of that, we, some research around athletes and looking at how, tennis players go from one point to another. And some of the research showed that the elite players, what made them different was not what they did during the point, but what they did in between the points, how they got over a bad point but got their head right for the next one. And then also I had an interaction with a CEO who literally built a new entrance into his house. So he would come in and he would park the car in the driveway, and he built an entrance from the garage to his room so he didn't have to see his family. So he would go in there and he'd have a shower and he'd change clothes and he'd just kind of get himself ready for family mode. And these were some of the interactions that got me thinking, wow, what we do in between what we do is really, really important. So yeah, I mean, it does have a interesting history.
It's interesting too as a space because it would require some focus to discipline your mind, not to go to it's all doom and gloom or the glass is half empty rather than half full.
Yeah, and in the reflection, so what we talk about in the third space is there's 3 things we need to do: reflect, rest, reset. And the reflection is just how do we interpret what we've been through so we don't carry that baggage forward. The rest phase is just can we be present and calm our mind. And the third thing is reset, which is how do we prepare ourselves for what's coming next. And part of it is that often when we reflect on what we've just done, we look at what was bad, what did I screw up, mistakes I made, which has an impact on us moving forward. So if we can, in that reflection, be more constructive, it helps us transition forward.
It's interesting you say that, Adam, because it's fairly entrenched in popular culture. People often say, you know what, I learn more from my mistakes than I do from my successes. Losing teaches you more than winning, which is, there's a counterintuitivity to that point, isn't there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. And what this is not about is just focusing on what was great about that or what I did well. It's just having a constructive reflection. And what we found in our research is too often when we reflected, we beat ourselves up. Oh, that was terrible, or oh, God, I'm hopeless at this. And yeah, that doesn't help us grow and evolve. But in that reflect phase, it's much more about, okay, if that was a disaster, what will I learn from that? Or what's the constructive action I can take forward? So it's not just ignore our mistakes, because we do learn from what we screwed up and, you know, what we got wrong. And even this morning you said to me, oh, I read this part of your collaterals or your marketing message and I thought that was terrible. And I sat there and went, actually, that is terrible. I have to change that. So like getting feedback and negative feedback is really helpful as well. So it's not just, we learn both from our successes and our mistakes. Yeah.
We shouldn't just focus entirely on our failures.
Yeah, and also psychology's gone too far in terms of, you know, just work on your strengths, just build on what you're doing well. We swing the pendulum too far, and what we want to do is observe both our failures, but also, you know, our successes as well.
People often listen to people such as yourself, Adam, and in the back of their minds they're going, well, that all sounds terrific, Adam, but can you tell us an example of you walking the talk on that?
In what in particular? Oh, well, gosh, far out. I could give you a million examples of them. Recently, yeah, from a personal perspective, I use this every day to transition home and be more present with my family. Because I see my role as a father. I have 2 young daughters and a husband. So my relationship with my wife is the most important thing in my life. Like when that is solid, I can handle anything. Like I can have setbacks, but when that relationship's good, I'm rock solid. And also, obviously, being a parent is incredibly important. And because my job is very out there and you give so much, and like I have a job where I stand on stage in front of 1,000 people and I'm constantly judged every second. Like, you know, rarely do you have a job where people watch you and critique you and then fill out an evaluation form on you every day. So that takes a lot from an individual, and often you kind of go home and you think, gosh, I've got nothing left. And if I went home each day with that attitude, my personal life would be a disaster. So I use that third space to show up as a better version of myself, and a version that contributes to my relationships rather than takes away. I mean, gosh, I've had instances like one of the biggest ones was, I was about to present at the not the entertainment centre, but the convention centre in Sydney to 5,000 people, and I got a call from a friend half an hour before, talking about the fact that one of my closest friends had died. And like tragic, unexpected. And I stood there and thought, gosh, what do I do? Like my instinct was, I just want to leave and I want to get out of here. But I thought, I have 5,000 people who are expecting me to show up and do this job. And I use that third space to go, all right, like I'm hurting, I'm in shock, I'm devastated, but you know what? I'm doing this thing. And use that gap to transition so I could walk on stage and do a good job. Now, obviously, afterwards, I bloody fell apart and, my whole world kind of collapsed for a little while. But it's using those spaces to, well, okay, if I'm going to commit to this, how do I change my psychology and physiology so I do a good job of this thing?
One of the important things, and I guess you'd be very familiar with this, Adam, as a researcher, is that the world never stays still. And you have a new book coming out which focuses very much on moving forward, using that third space even better.
Yeah, I mean, my next book is called Strive. And the tagline is embracing the gift of struggle. And the book focuses on two findings from our research. Number one is that what we showed is people feel most alive and engaged when they're striving towards a meaningful goal, aspiration, vision. So a lot of people think we're happiest when we achieve the thing, but what we showed is after we achieve this big sort of goal, we tend to feel a bit flat and we tend to feel empty. So we're actually most engaged and happiest when we're working towards the thing. We kind of have this seeking drive to evolve, and we call that the strive. The other thing the book talks about is that how the happiness movement and this desire to feel comfortable all the time has perverted our relationship with struggle and challenge. So if you're going to strive towards something, book in an appointment with struggle, because anytime we try to evolve, there's discomfort, it feels bad, we make mistakes, things go wrong. But this view of, we should feel happy all the time, makes us run from that struggle. So the moment it feels uncomfortable, we retreat. And I don't know whether you see this in, new generations coming through, particularly with staff, is that when things get hard, they tend to just want to leave and move on to something else. And that inability to sit with struggle, what the book talks about is having a very dysfunctional impact on us.
Yeah, you just reminded me of something when I was a teenager, Adam, the word boredom.
Yeah.
I learned very rapidly never to be bored. One day I turned up one Saturday morning and I said to my mum, I was grumbling about being bored. My father pricked his ears and said, "Son, I've got something for you to do outside." And I was excited until we got in the backyard. He had a truckload of timber that needed to be chopped up.
Yeah.
I spent the next 2 hours chopping up that timber and had my hands in blisters. I was never bored again.
Yeah. But I mean, if you look at the research around boredom, it's a devastating thing. And I don't mean moments of boredom, they're fine, but chronic boredom. One of the worst things we can do for our well-being is retire. Like, people think, I'll tolerate work and then when I retire, I'm going to feel awesome. And most of them are devastated because they don't have that structure or that challenge, or that they're not having to evolve and change. Boredom is, chronic boredom is devastating. One of the things we did for the book actually was we interviewed, I interviewed lawyers that looked after huge trust funds for really rich families. And what they were saying is that the children in really wealthy families where they don't have to work hard and they're given everything, they're a disaster. Like, this ability to evolve and change is so critical. Like, we need challenge and to evolve over that challenge. So boredom is something we don't want to spend a lot of time in.
No, loneliness is another one, isn't it?
Actually, it's really interesting. The research around loneliness, and particularly for men as they age, is...
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. I'm sure you're not doing this. But loneliness is a real issue today. And that you look at so much research, one of the biggest drivers of well-being is that, do I feel connected? Do I have... strong relationships, support around me, and that loneliness is being dialed up. Yeah.
It segues well into perhaps the concluding part of our chat today, Adam, and that is the world of the future. And as a researcher, you'd have to be keenly interested in that. The world of AI, genetic engineering. How will this impact on our relationships, our connectivity, our sense of worth, our sense of identity?
Yeah, this is really interesting. This is not an area I have a lot of expertise in. I mean, one of the challenges we have is as we become more and more digital, we have less interaction. And, you see people out and about and their phone is their primary relationship. And I think that is having a negative impact, particularly on children as well. I mean, moving forward, like, one of the big concerns is what's going to happen with jobs. And because having a job, you look at the long-term unemployed, that's a devastating state to be in. So one of my concerns is that as jobs get removed, what what is going to be the impact on the individual, because we need that strive. We need to go to work and be challenged and to evolve. So, I mean, and as I said before, this is not my expertise, and one of the theories is that more and more jobs are going to go and there's going to be less jobs available because of automation. So my big concern is, how do we fill that gap for people? Because if I don't have an occupation which involves my identity, but also if we don't have that challenge and that stimulation, what is going to happen down the track, and how's that going to affect well-being and mental health and all those things?
And wrapping up, Adam, getting back to your field of expertise, if you're in the bubble, you don't always know how you are really doing. People go to work and one day they have a heart attack. Getting themselves into a state where they need to know that perhaps that third space, as you put it, is the place to start recreating your life. What's your advice to those people?
So to the people that's a brilliant question, because, and here's what I see is we do get in that bubble or on that treadmill, and we just get caught up in the activity. And this comes back to the Strive book of, when we feel struggle or discomfort, our natural instinct is to, how do I make that go away? So rather than being able to sit with the discomfort of, holy crap, my life is not going well, I'm not fulfilled, I'm not happy, my health's not good. And rather than really kind of wrestle with that and explore that and work out what we're going to do, instead people just numb. And we numb through food or TV or alcohol, which is usually the choice at the end of the day. Yeah, and far too many people just are in this perpetual bubble and they don't stop and take stock and take action to evolve things. So yeah, one of the biggest problems is the busyness and the frantic nature of our lives. We just get stuck in that rut. And I'm working with a group at the moment who are very senior, very well-paid people, and they're in that big time. And they're not enjoying the job, but it's almost like, well, I've geared my lifestyle so that I have private school fees, a huge mortgage, fancy car, pool, and it's almost like I've set up the thing that I can't back off, I can't slow down because I've got to feed this lifestyle. But it's like literally killing them, but they're stuck in it. And I think our inability to sit with the discomfort of, wow, my life's not going in a direction, I'm going to take some action, stops them from doing that. They'd rather numb than sit with the discomfort of, well, what am I going to change?
Well, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you today, Adam, and I know that when this interview ends, I'm going to get into my own third space, and by the time I get home, I'll be a wonderful character.
Yeah, well, we hope so.
That was Dr. Adam Fraser, peak performance researcher, author and international presenter. For more videos such as this one, just press the subscribe button below. I'm Henry Grossek. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.